A struggling woman helps a stranger start his bike, unaware he's the leader of the Hells Angels. She thought it was just a quick act of kindness on a dusty roadside, but that single moment will change everything. Because the man she helps isn't just some biker. He's running from a past soaked in danger, guilt, and secrets. When he walks into her small-town diner days later, the whispers start. The church turns cold. Her whole town begins to wonder, who exactly did she bring into their quiet lives? But when his old world comes looking for him, she'll face the choice no one ever expects: protect her safety or protect a soul everyone else gave up on. He's been judged his whole life. She's about to find out why. Can a single act of kindness save a man everyone calls beyond redemption, or destroy the only peace she's ever found? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Arizona sun burned hot enough to melt the road. Heat shimmered above the cracked blacktop as Grace Miller gripped the steering wheel of her old blue pickup, the one that rattled every time she pressed the gas. Sweat rolled down her temples, and her cotton work shirt clung to her back. Her shift at the diner started in 40 minutes, and she was running late. Again. The radio crackled in and out, the same old gospel tune fighting through static. Grace sang along under her breath, her voice low and shaky but soft, like someone who still believed every word even after life had taken so much. She'd lost her husband 3 years ago, and her home soon after. Now, every mile she drove to work felt like she was dragging her past behind her on a chain. She was halfway down the lonely desert road when she spotted him. A tall man stood beside a black motorcycle, his broad back hunched over the engine. His jacket was dark leather, worn thin at the elbows, and his boots were heavy with dust. Grace slowed the truck without thinking. He looked stranded, and something inside her, something stubborn and kind, wouldn't let her keep driving. She pulled over, her tires crunching gravel. "Need some help?" she called out through the open window. The man looked up. His face was hard, shaded by the brim of his helmet, but his eyes, icy blue and tired, met hers with surprise. "Battery's dead," he said. His voice was low and rough, the kind that came from too many cigarettes or too many regrets. Grace hesitated for just a second. He was big, tattooed, and looked like trouble. But then she saw how the heat shimmered around him, how the sun baked the road until it looked like glass. No one else was coming by anytime soon. "I've got cables," she said, climbing out. He gave a short nod. "Appreciate it." The moment felt strange. Quiet, except for the ticking of the engine and the hum of insects. Grace popped her hood, her heart beating a little faster than usual. The man worked beside her without saying much. His hands were scarred, his knuckles rough, but he was careful not to touch her. When the bike finally coughed and came to life, he exhaled hard, almost like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. He looked at her again, the corner of his mouth twitching into a half smile. "Didn't think anyone would stop out here," he said. Grace wiped her hands on her jeans. "Well, someone should. Desert's no place to be stuck alone." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "You got a good heart, lady." He reached for his wallet, but she shook her head. "Keep your money. Just glad it's running." He zipped the wallet back into his jacket. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "You have a safe ride." As he swung his leg over the bike, Grace noticed the patch stitched across the back of his vest. It was a skull with wings. The words, "Hells Angels." National chapter curling above it. Her throat tightened. He caught her looking and said nothing. Just gave a small nod, revved the engine, and thundered away down the highway. The sound echoed for a long time after he disappeared. Grace stood there beside her truck, heart thudding, unsure whether to be proud of herself or terrified. "Lord," she whispered, "what did I just do?" When she finally got back behind the wheel, she kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following. But the road stayed empty. By the time she reached the diner, the sun had dipped low and painted everything gold. She parked behind the building and hurried inside, apologizing to her boss, Mr. Talbot, who frowned but waved her off. "Just get to your tables, Grace," he said. The evening passed in a blur of clinking dishes, coffee refills, and tired truckers. Yet her mind stayed on that man with the ice-blue eyes. The way he said, "You got a good heart, lady." When the crowd thinned out near closing time, Grace leaned on the counter, watching the clock tick toward midnight. The neon sign outside buzzed softly, throwing red light across the floor. Linda, her friend from church, dropped a towel beside her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Grace smiled faintly. "Picked up a stranger on the way to work, helped him jump his bike." Linda raised her eyebrows. "Grace Miller, you can't just stop for every rough-looking man on the road. What if he'd robbed you?" Grace chuckled weakly. "Guess I didn't think that far ahead." "What did he look like?" Linda asked. "Big. Tattoos. Quiet." Grace hesitated. "He had a jacket on, with one of those biker patches." Linda froze mid-wipe. "What kind of patch?" Grace swallowed. "Said Hell's Angels." The towel slipped from Linda's hands. "Oh, Grace," she whispered. "You didn't just help a biker, you helped one of those bikers." Grace said nothing. She just looked out the window at the empty parking lot, her reflection, dim in the glass. For a moment she thought she saw a faint red glow, tail lights fading into the night. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Those eyes that seemed both fierce and lost. She told herself it was just a stranger she'd never see again. But deep down, something in her heart said, this wasn't over. As the desert wind rattled her trailer walls, Grace whispered one last prayer before drifting off. "Lord, if that man's still running from something, help him find his way." Outside, somewhere far down the highway, the roar of a motorcycle echoed once more, fading into the darkness like a promise. Morning light slid across the desert like a warm hand. Grace woke to the sound of wind scraping sand against her trailer door. For a moment she lay still, listening to the quiet. The night before felt like a dream. Heat haze, a broken motorcycle, the heavy thrum of an engine leaving. She touched the small cross at her neck and breathed a simple prayer. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Then she pushed herself up, made coffee, and packed her lunch in a brown paper bag the way she always did. Her truck coughed twice before the engine caught. She gave the cracked dash an affectionate pat. "Come on, old girl, one more day." The air smelled of dust and sun-baked creosote. Off in the distance, a hawk circled, looking for something small and careless. Grace tightened her grip on the wheel and headed toward town. The diner looked ordinary under the big blue sky, its silver trim shining like a nickel. The neon sign blinked awake. Talbot's Diner. One letter forever stuck. She parked around back, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and went in through the kitchen. The smells lifted her spirits. Bacon popping on the griddle, biscuits browning in the oven, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Morning, Grace," called Mr. Talbot, not looking up from his clipboard. "We got a tour bus cutting through at noon. Keep your tables flipped, okay?" "You got it." She tied on her apron and forced a smile. The routine steadied her. Wipe menus, fill salt shakers, stack clean mugs. She liked the order of it, the way small tasks lined up like beads on a string. It gave her something to hold. By 9, the booths were half full. A farmer with sun-creased hands ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie. 2 road workers split a plate of eggs and sausage, their boots dusty and their laughter loud. Linda slipped in for a quick breakfast before work at the church. She slid onto a stool and tilted her head at Grace. "You sleep any?" Linda asked. "A little," Grace said. "Trying not to think about it." "Good." Linda lowered her voice. "And I mean this with love. No more stopping for mystery men on dead roads." Grace offered a small smile. "I'll try." The doorbell jingled. A space opened around the entrance the way it does when a storm front hits. Grace looked up and felt her stomach drop. He stood there, tall and broad in the doorway, leather jacket slung one-handed over his shoulder. His hair was pulled back, his beard trimmed too close to be careless. The air changed. Even the griddle seemed to quiet. The stranger from the highway scanned the room. His eyes found Grace. She did not move. Her breath came quick and thin. All at once she was glad for the counter between them. He took a seat at the far end, on a stool that rocked a little, and set his helmet on the floor with care, like it was something fragile. When Grace approached with her notepad, his gaze softened. The tattoos at his neck, dark vines and shapes, peeked above the collar of a plain gray t-shirt. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady because she made it be. "Coffee," he said. "Black." After a beat, he added, "Please." She poured from the fresh pot and set the mug in front of him. Steam rose between them. He held the cup without drinking, warming his hands. Up close, his knuckles showed pale scars, the kind that told long stories no one ever wanted to hear out loud. "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome." She turned to go, then stopped. "I'm glad your bike started." He gave a single nod, almost shy. "Me too." Grace moved down the counter to wipe, to pour, to smile, to refill. Simple things. But every time she glanced up, he was just there. Quiet, shoulders relaxed, eyes calmer than she expected. He watched the room the way people watch a fire, wary but hungry for the light. After a minute, he spoke again, not loud, as if he was talking to himself. "Wasn't sure I should come back." Grace kept her hands busy with napkin dispensers. "Why did you?" He considered the question. "Debt," he said at last. "I wanted to pay mine." "You don't owe me." He looked at her with a faint crease at the bridge of his nose, like he didn't agree but didn't want to argue. "Some debts you pay anyway," he said. The bell over the door rang again. 3 older men shuffled in, veterans who came every Thursday after visiting the clinic. They took their usual booth. One walked with a limp, one spoke too loudly because he couldn't hear, and one always joked about the pie being too small even when it wasn't. Grace loved them the way you love old trees that have survived 100 storms. She served them meatloaf special and cherry pie. When she brought their check, the stranger lifted a hand. "Put it with mine," he said. Grace blinked. "That's very kind, sir, but—" "Do it anyway," he said. Not sharp, just firm. He slid 100 across the counter. "And keep the change." She stared at the bill, then at him. Something in his face said he wanted no fuss, so she nodded and wrote it up. When she turned, she noticed he was watching the veteran's booth. Not with pride, not with pity, but with a soft look that made him seem younger. The hour stretched. He finished his coffee. He ordered eggs and toast and ate like a man who had been taught to clean his plate. No one talked to him, but everyone looked. The road workers muttered. One couple whispered. The farmer at the end studied his hands like they were as interesting as a book. Linda leaned across the counter toward Grace. Is that him? Grace didn't answer with words. She just nodded. Linda's voice dropped to a thread. You need me to stay? Grace smiled without showing teeth. I'm okay. After he finished eating, the stranger stood and reached for his wallet. He paused as if listening to some inner voice, then walked the length of the counter. Without a word, he paid for the veterans, the farmer, and the road workers in one quiet motion. Mr. Talbot raised his brows but took the money. Grace felt a flush rise to her face. Sir, that's too much. He shook his head a fraction. Not enough. He pulled the receipt closer and wrote something on it, with a slow, careful hand, like he wrote so seldom the letters still surprised him. Then he slid the slip toward her and lifted his helmet. Wait, she said, not sure why. He stopped. They stood, two people with a whole diner of silence around them. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. You stopped for me, he said. I stopped for you. Then he turned and left. The bell jingled. The door swung shut. Through the window, Grace watched him fit the helmet on, settle onto the bike, and fire it up. The engine rumbled deep in his chest, and the glass. He rolled away slow, like a man who had nowhere urgent to be and too many places to leave behind. Grace looked down at the receipt. 6 words, blocky and neat. You stopped for me, I stopped for you. Underneath, a rough sketch of a small cross. Her throat tightened. She folded the slip and tucked it into the pocket of her apron like a secret. When she looked up, the room had loosened, voices rising again, forks scraping plates. Life had resumed. But something had shifted, like a chair quietly moved back into place. Linda exhaled. Well, she said. He wasn't rude. Not even close, Grace murmured. Mr. Talbot ambled over, pretending not to be curious. Nice tip, he said, squinting. You know him? No, Grace said, then corrected herself in her heart. Not yet. Through the afternoon, sunlight slid across the tile floor, square by square. The tour bus never showed. Grace refilled coffee, listened to tiny stories, and kept one hand on the folded receipt as if it might float away. Each time the bell rang, she turned, half hoping, half afraid to see the stranger again. He didn't come back. Near closing, she stepped outside to breathe. The sky wore a soft purple bruise of evening. Heat rose off the cars, and crickets started their choir. She rested her palms on the cool metal rail and watched dust move like smoke in the last light. Behind her, Linda pushed the door open with her hip. You okay? Grace nodded. He paid for those men, all of them. I saw. Linda's mouth softened. Doesn't fix everything. No, Grace said, but it fixed something. They stood side by side until the dusk turned deeper. Then they went in to sweep, to stack chairs, to count the till. Small work that steadied shaking hearts. When Grace locked the door and slipped the key into her pocket, she felt the folded paper press against her palm. She left it there. On the drive home, the desert looked like a sea gone still. A soft wind touched the sage, turning it into shadows that swayed and bowed. Grace's headlights carved a bright tunnel through the dark. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled without lightning. At the trailer, she washed her face and brushed her hair. She set the receipt on the bedside table, beside a photo of her husband in a cheap frame. The man in the picture smiled with kind eyes from a yesterday that couldn't come back. She touched the glass, and then the paper, one after the other, the past and the present sharing the same small square of light. Lord, she whispered, if this is trouble, lead me clear. If this is mercy, help me see. She lay down and let the old springs complain. The desert wind moved again, softer now, more like breath than weather. Sleep came slow. When it finally took her, she dreamed of a road that went on forever and a motorcycle that did not threaten but simply hummed, steady as a heartbeat, somewhere just ahead. Morning broke pale and quiet over the desert. The air smelled faintly of dust and sage. Grace opened the blinds of her small trailer and stood for a long while, just watching the sunlight crawl across the gravel. She felt lighter somehow, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the memory of the stranger's calm voice. Maybe it was the way he'd paid for everyone's meal without asking for thanks. Either way, something inside her, some piece that had been locked tight, had started to breathe again. At the diner that morning, the air buzzed with chatter. Truckers lined up for coffee, locals dropped by for pancakes, and Grace worked with steady rhythm. Yet she noticed people glancing at her, whispers curling like cigarette smoke. She couldn't hear words, only the tone, half curious, half warning. When she passed Linda, her friend's smile was strained. "What's all this about?" Grace asked, lowering her voice. Linda sighed. "Word's out about your visitor. Folks say the man who came in yesterday's no ordinary biker." Grace frowned. What did they mean? "They think he's dangerous," Linda whispered. "One of the Hells Angels. Someone said they saw that patch on his jacket, clear as day." Grace didn't answer. She set down a coffee pot and wiped her hands on a towel, staring out the window. "He was kind," she said softly. "Paid for half the town's meals." Linda's eyes softened. "I'm sure he was. But people here, well, they scare easy. They've read too many stories." The bell above the door jingled, and the morning light fell across the counter. Grace turned, half expecting to see that familiar figure again, but it was only an old man with a cane. Her heart fell for reasons she couldn't explain. That night, when the diner emptied, she stood by the window with the neon sign buzzing pink beside her. Her boss, Mr. Talbot, counted the register behind her. "You did good today, Grace," he said without looking up. "Tips are solid." "Thank you," she said, though her thoughts were far away. Talbot straightened and rubbed his neck. "Listen," he added gently. "Folks been talking. Not my business what you do off shift, but you might want to steer clear of that biker fella. Last thing we need is trouble around here." Grace turned. "He's not trouble." Talbot's brow furrowed. "You sure about that?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, she wasn't sure about anything except how he'd made her feel, safe, somehow, when she should have been scared. "He's trying," she said finally. "That counts for something." Talbot studied her face, then nodded. "Just be careful." Grace stayed behind to close up. The sound of the clock ticked in the quiet. She wiped down the counter and hummed to herself, a soft tune she hadn't sung in years. When she turned to hang her apron, she froze. Through the diner window, a figure stood outside in the dark. Tall, still, watching. Her first instinct was fear, but then the man stepped forward into the dim light, the same black leather jacket, the same tired blue eyes. Ryder. He opened the door halfway, letting the desert wind drift in. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said quietly. Grace's heartbeat steadied. "You didn't. Come in out of the heat." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His boots left faint prints on the tile. "Was just passing through," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "Thought I'd stop for a cup." "Coffee's fresh," she said, pouring him a mug. They sat at the counter, the empty diner humming around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ryder broke the silence. "People here don't like me much, do they?" Grace looked down at her hands. They don't know you. Don't need to, he said. They see the patch. That's enough. She studied him for a moment. Then why wear it? He hesitated, thumb tracing the edge of the coffee cup. It's not something you take off easy, even when you want to. Grace nodded slowly. Maybe not, but you can still change what it means. That made him look at her. Really look. His eyes softened, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile as glass. He smiled faintly. You always talk like that? Like what? Like there's still hope. Grace smiled back. Maybe there is. He chuckled quietly, a low sound that almost sounded like relief. You remind me of someone, he said. My mother. She believed in fixing things nobody thought could be fixed. Did you listen to her? He looked away, the smile fading. Not enough. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing dust against the window pane. Grace wanted to ask about his past, about what he was running from, but she sensed that pushing too soon might scare him off. Instead, she reached across the counter and refilled his cup. Sometimes, she said gently, people come into our lives when they need a place to rest. Doesn't mean they have to stay forever. He nodded, eyes fixed on the coffee. Maybe I'm tired of running. They sat in silence after that, both lost in thought. Grace watched his hands, the way they trembled slightly when he reached for his cup, the faint scars around his knuckles. She wondered what kind of life left marks like that. When he finally stood, she noticed he'd left cash beneath the mug again. Far too much for a simple drink. You don't have to keep doing that, she said, following him to the door. He gave a small shrug. Maybe I do. He paused, one hand on the handle, and looked back at her. You ever feel like you were meant to meet somebody? Like it wasn't an accident? Grace felt her heart skip. Sometimes, she whispered, but I don't always know why. He gave a small, almost grateful nod. Me neither. Then he was gone into the night again, his motorcycle growling like distant thunder. Grace locked the door, leaning her forehead against the glass. The desert outside stretched endless and empty, yet she felt something alive stirring in her chest, a spark of hope she hadn't felt since her husband's passing. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to live the rest of her life alone. But as she turned off the lights, she didn't notice the shape of another man standing across the street near the shadows, watching, waiting, and lighting a cigarette that flared bright red before disappearing into darkness. By morning, the gossip had thickened like dust after a storm. At the diner, conversation stopped when Grace walked in. Mr. Talbot gave her a wary look, and Linda, usually all smiles, barely met her eyes. Grace tried to shrug it off, but whispers followed her like shadows. Everyone had heard about the biker who'd been seen visiting her late at night. In a small Arizona town, that was enough to turn kindness into scandal. Grace kept her chin high and her hands busy. She took orders, poured coffee, smiled until her cheeks hurt. Still, she could feel the unease around her. Even the regulars, the farmers, the veterans, looked unsure. Small towns remembered everything and forgave slowly. At lunch, Linda finally came over, wiping her hands on a towel. Grace, people are talking, she said softly. They think you've got yourself tangled up with trouble. Grace looked up from her notepad. I helped a man. That's all. No, Linda said, lowering her voice. But others don't. They say he's dangerous, that he's been seen with the Hells Angels before. Grace frowned. He's trying to change. I can feel it. Linda sighed. Maybe so. But folks around here, they don't like what they don't understand. You can't save everyone, Grace. Grace gave a small, sad smile. Maybe not. But I can still try. That evening, clouds gathered low over the mountains. Thunder rumbled faintly, promising rain. The diner was nearly empty when the bell above the door rang. Ryder stepped in, shaking droplets from his leather jacket. His hair was damp, his eyes shadowed but calm. Grace's heart leapt before she could stop it. "You'll catch cold out there," she said, handing him a towel from behind the counter. He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be the worst thing that's ever happened to me." "Sit down," she said. "Coffee's hot." He took his usual stool. "Long ride tonight," he murmured, wrapping his hands around the mug. "Figured I'd stop somewhere that didn't look at me like I'm poison." Grace hesitated, then sat across from him. "You ever think people fear what they don't try to understand?" "All the time," he said, then looked at her. "You don't." "I've been judged too," she said. "Lost things I never thought I could. But I learned to see the good that's left." Something in his expression softened. "You lost your husband, right?" Grace's throat tightened. "Cancer. Took everything but my faith." He nodded slowly. "I lost my brother. Overdose. Took everything but my guilt." They sat quietly after that, the rain tapping gentle fingers on the window. The silence wasn't heavy. It was honest, the kind that felt like two souls finally breathing in the same rhythm. When the storm eased, Ryder finished his coffee and stood. "You ever think about getting out of this place?" he asked. Grace looked around at the diner, the flickering sign, the worn booths, the smell of coffee and soap. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But where would I go?" "Anywhere the past can't find you," he said. "That's what I'm trying to do." As he pulled on his jacket, she noticed something different. His shoulders weren't as tense. For the first time, he seemed lighter, freer. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. "And for not looking at me like everyone else does." Grace smiled softly. "You're welcome anytime." He opened the door but stopped when a flash of light caught his eye. Across the street, a car engine idled, headlights aimed their way. Ryder stiffened, eyes narrowing. "That's not a friend," he muttered. Grace turned, heart pounding. "Who is it?" He didn't answer, just pulled his collar up and stepped into the rain. The car engine revved, then slowly rolled away. Ryder watched until the taillights vanished. "Everything all right?" Grace called from the doorway. He looked back at her and forced a faint smile. "Yeah, just ghosts from a life I should have buried." When he rode off, the sound of his bike faded into the wet night, leaving Grace alone with the hum of the sign and a hollow ache in her chest. The next morning, she found a church bulletin slipped under her trailer door. The words, "Be not unequally yoked," were circled in red pen. No name, no note, just warning disguised as scripture. At service that Sunday, whispers followed her down the aisle. The choir's song sounded thinner than usual. When Grace tried to greet people, they smiled too quickly and turned away. Afterward, Pastor Brooks called her aside. "Grace," he said gently, "folks are worried. They say you've been spending time with that biker." "I've been kind," she said, trying not to sound defensive. "I know your heart," he said. "But perception matters. You're a respected woman here." Grace's patience wavered. "And what about him? Doesn't he deserve kindness too?" Brooks sighed. "Maybe. But some men are too far gone." Grace met his eyes, fire sparking behind her calm. "No one's too far gone." He hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Just be careful, Grace." She left before the closing hymn. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain-soaked sage and something sharper, like judgment still hanging in the air. That night, Grace locked up the diner alone. The power flickered with the storm's return. She stood by the window, watching water streak down the glass when headlights flashed across the lot. Her heart jumped, but it wasn't Ryder's motorcycle. It was the sheriff's cruiser. Sheriff Dean Weller stepped inside, rain dripping off his hat brim. "Evening, Grace," he said, voice steady. "Evening, Sheriff." He looked around the empty diner. "He's been coming by regular, hasn't he? That biker fella." Grace folded her arms. "He's a customer, that's all." Weller studied her face. "Maybe so, but I hear he's been trying to leave his old club. Those kinds of men don't leave clean." "He's not like that," she said firmly. The sheriff sighed, adjusting his hat. "For your sake, I hope you're right, but I've seen too many folks try to outrun their past. Never works for long." When he left, Grace sat down at the counter, her reflection dim in the stainless steel. She thought of Ryder's words, "Ghosts from a life I should have buried." She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe ghosts can find peace if someone prays hard enough." The storm outside rolled on, fierce and endless. Yet inside, her heart felt calm. No matter what the town thought, she knew what she'd seen in Ryder's eyes. Pain, yes, but also something gentler, flickering beneath all that hurt. And Grace Miller had never been one to turn away from a soul that still carried light. The sun rose over the desert in a wash of pink and gold. The rain had Fontainebleau cleared, leaving everything smelling clean and sharp. Grace's old pickup sat stubbornly in the driveway, refusing to start again. She tried 3 times, the engine coughing weakly before giving up with a sigh. She sat there gripping the steering wheel, biting her lip to keep from crying. It wasn't just the truck. It was the whispers at church, the looks at work, the way even Mr. Talbot had started double-checking her register drawer. She felt tired down to her bones. "Lord," she whispered, resting her forehead against the wheel, "I'm doing my best, but I sure could use a break." The sound of a motorcycle engine broke the quiet morning. Her heart jumped. She looked up and saw a familiar shape riding slow down the road. Ryder turned into her drive, dust swirling behind him. He stopped a few feet from her truck, cut the engine, and lifted his helmet. His eyes found hers immediately. Steady. Searching. "Truck won't start?" he asked. Grace managed a small smile. "She's been stubborn since the rain." Ryder nodded toward the hood. "Pop it open." Grace hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. She pulled the lever. Ryder propped the hood and leaned in, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His forearms were marked with scars and grease, but his movements were careful, almost gentle. He worked in silence, humming a low tune that sounded like an old road song. Grace stood nearby, holding the flashlight even though the morning sun made it unnecessary. "You've done this before," she said softly. "Used to fix bikes for the club," he replied. "Never had much, but I knew how to make engines run." He paused to look at her. "You ever notice how machines break for the same reasons people do? Neglect. Wear. Nobody paying attention until something stops working." Grace smiled faintly. "You sound like my husband used to." Ryder glanced up, curious. "He fixed cars too?" "Everything," she said. "Farm equipment, plumbing, hearts that were hurting. He had hands that healed things." Ryder nodded, tightening a bolt. "Good man, sounds like." "The best," Grace said quietly. The truck coughed once, then started with a throaty rumble. Grace's face lit up, surprise and gratitude flooding her features. "You did it!" Ryder grinned, a rare, honest smile that made him look years younger. "Just needed some love and patience," he said. "Same as everything else." Grace laughed, covering her mouth. The sound came out rusty from disuse, but real. "How can I repay you?" Lunch, he said, wiping his hands. Nothing fancy. She hesitated, then nodded. I can do that. They sat on her small porch an hour later, 2 chipped bowls of homemade stew between them. The air was soft and warm. A lizard scurried across the step. Grace felt her shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. Ryder ate quietly, as if he wasn't used to home-cooked meals anymore. He glanced at the flower pot beside him, a wilted plant fighting for life. You keep things alive, he said. Grace followed his gaze. Sometimes, she said. Other times I just try to make the dying a little easier. He nodded slowly. That's something too. For a while, they just sat listening to the wind. When Grace cleared the dishes, Ryder leaned back against the porch post, looking up at the wide sky. You know, he said, I don't remember the last time I sat still like this. Feels strange. Maybe you were meant to stop for a reason, Grace said. He chuckled softly. You really think everything's meant to be? I think some things are, she said. The rest is what we do with them. He thought about that for a long time, then nodded. Maybe that's true. That evening, Grace went to church for choir practice. When she stepped inside, heads turned. The pianist paused mid-note. Linda gave her a small, apologetic smile, but others weren't so kind. Is it true he's been at your house? One woman whispered loudly enough for all to hear. Grace set her hymnal on the stand. He helped fix my truck, she said evenly. The woman sniffed. That's what they all say. Grace's heart pounded. She thought of leaving. But then she remembered Ryder's calm face, the kindness in his eyes. She lifted her chin and said, Sometimes people need help, and sometimes helping them is what God expects of us, whether it looks good to others or not. The room fell silent. The pianist returned to her keys, and for the rest of the hour, no one spoke another word against her. When Grace walked home that night, the stars stretched wide and brilliant above the desert. For once, she didn't feel small beneath them. She felt strong. 2 days later, she was wiping down the diner counter when she noticed movement outside. Ryder was across the street, talking to a group of men near a white van. One of them wore a jacket with a faded club patch. Their voices carried, low and tense. Ryder's shoulders stiffened. Grace froze, watching through the window. The men stepped closer. Ryder said something she couldn't hear. One of them spat at his boots before turning and walking away. Ryder stayed still until they were gone, then glanced toward the diner window. For a brief second, their eyes met. Grace saw weariness there, but also a quiet resolve. He came in a few minutes later. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Old friends, he said, sliding onto a stool. Not the good kind? Do they know where you are? They do now. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Guess word gets around faster than forgiveness? Grace poured him coffee and sat down across from him. You don't have to keep fighting, Ryder. You can let the past go. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice low. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said. But maybe it's worth it. He nodded, slowly, taking a sip. Maybe so. That Sunday, Ryder showed up at church. He stood in the back pew, hat in hand, his face unreadable. Grace caught his eye as she sang, and for the first time he didn't look away. Some people whispered, others frowned. But when the service ended, he quietly slipped a folded envelope into the offering plate. Later, Pastor Brooks found Grace and said, almost reluctantly, Your friend just covered the roof repairs. Anonymous donation. But I recognized the handwriting. Grace smiled. I figured you would. That afternoon, Ryder helped the volunteers climb up and patch the shingles, laughing for the first time since she'd known him. His laughter was rough and rare, but real. Watching him from the ground, Grace felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't romance she felt. It was something deeper. The simple joy of watching a lost soul start to believe that redemption was possible. When Ryder climbed down, covered in dust, he grinned at her. "Guess miracles can happen with a hammer and a few nails," he said. Grace laughed softly. Sometimes that's exactly how they start. As the sun set behind the church steeple, the sky burned orange and gold. For a brief, shining moment, everything felt right. Grace looked up at the roof they'd fixed together, then at the man beside her, and she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now she was certain of one thing. Hope had found its way back into both their lives. The next few mornings brought a kind of peace Grace hadn't felt in years. The desert air was cool, the diner's coffee smelled rich, and her laughter came easier. People still whispered sometimes, but she'd learned not to listen. She focused on what she could control, showing kindness, keeping faith, and watching Ryder begin to change in small, steady ways. Every day for a week, he showed up at the church before sunrise, hammer in hand. He worked quietly on the roof, replacing rotten boards and fixing leaks, often with a group of veterans he'd called brothers from another life. Grace brought them lemonade and sandwiches when she could. Watching those men, tattooed, rough around the edges, but laughing and helping one another, filled her with a deep, quiet joy. Pastor Brooks didn't quite know what to make of it. He'd hover by the steps, hands clasped behind his back, his expression caught somewhere between suspicion and awe. Finally, one morning, he approached Grace as she handed out water bottles. "I'll say this," he admitted. "That man knows how to work." Grace smiled. "He's been working at more than wood and nails, Pastor." Brooks nodded slowly. "Maybe so. And maybe I was wrong to doubt him." Grace looked toward the roof where Ryder stood, shirt damp with sweat, sunlight turning the scars on his arms silver. "People can surprise you if you give them half a chance." The pastor chuckled softly. "I think that's your gift, Grace. You see the good in everyone." She shook her head. "I just look for the part that's still trying." That evening, the volunteers finished the last of the repairs. The roof gleamed with new shingles, and the church bell caught the late light like gold. Grace organized a small supper at the diner to thank the men. She baked biscuits, and Linda made a pot of chili that filled the whole place with warmth. When Ryder walked in, heads turned, but not the way they had before. The regulars nodded at him. Even Mr. Talbot offered a small, respectful smile. Ryder looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Grace noticed the way his shoulders eased when Tommy Wheels Carson, one of his old veteran friends, clapped him on the back and said, "Guess even sinners can swing a hammer." Ryder grinned. "Guess so." Grace watched them from the counter, her heart swelling with something she didn't quite have words for. Maybe pride, maybe hope, maybe both. After supper, as the last of the men left, Ryder lingered by the door. "Didn't think they'd ever look at me without fear," he said quietly. Grace wiped her hands on her apron. "You earned it." He tilted his head. "Don't know if I deserve it." "Deserving's not the point," she said. "It's what you do next that matters." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the neon sign outside. Then Ryder said softly, "You talk like you've forgiven someone who didn't ask for it." Grace froze, her smile faltering. "Maybe I have." He studied her face, eyes gentle. "Your husband?" She nodded once. "He used to drink too much when the pain got bad. Said some things that broke me. I forgave him anyway. It's how I kept breathing after he was gone." Ryder's expression softened even more. "You're stronger than you look." Grace smiled faintly. "So are you." He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Don't know about that." "You'll see," she said. "God's not done with you yet." He seemed to think about that. Maybe he's just getting started. A week later, Pastor Brooks held a small service to bless the repaired roof. The whole town came out. Farmers, truckers, veterans, families. Grace sat near the back, proud and nervous all at once. Ryder stood outside near the steps, hat in his hands, listening from afar. The pastor's voice carried through the warm air. "Sometimes grace comes not from angels, but from those we least expect. Redemption wears many faces." Grace's eyes filled with tears. When she looked toward the doorway, she saw Ryder standing straighter, his face unreadable, but his eyes bright with emotion. For the first time, he crossed the threshold and stepped inside. The room went still. The choir faltered mid-note. Grace held her breath. Ryder walked quietly to the back pew and sat down. No one spoke. Pastor Brooks cleared his throat and said, "Welcome, brother." The rest of the service flowed easy after that. The pastor prayed, the choir sang, and sunlight poured through the stained glass window, landing right where Ryder sat. Grace saw him lower his head, his lips moving soundlessly. Afterward, she found him by the steps, looking at the sky. "I wasn't planning to walk in," he admitted. "Just felt like maybe I should." Grace smiled. "Maybe you were meant to." He nodded. "Maybe." That night, the diner stayed open late. A warm breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the smell of rain and fried food. Grace stood behind the counter, wiping mugs, when Ryder walked in again, without his jacket this time. Just a plain flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You off the clock?" he asked. "Just about. Mind if I sit?" She nodded toward the stool. "You don't have to ask." He sat, drumming his fingers lightly on the counter. "I've been thinking," he said. "All my life, I thought strength meant keeping people away. Turns out it might mean letting someone close enough to see the mess." Grace leaned on the counter. "That's not weakness. That's courage." He met her eyes. "You think there's still a chance for someone like me?" "I don't think," she said softly. "I know." He looked down, swallowing hard. "Then I'll try." She smiled, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "That's all it takes." They sat in quiet companionship as the clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, the wind stirred dust along the street, carrying with it a sense of something ending and something new beginning. When Ryder finally stood, he said, "You ever get tired of saving people, Grace?" She shook her head. "I'm not saving anyone, just reminding them they still matter." He smiled faintly. "Guess that's what saving looks like." As he left, he reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter, a small silver cross on a leather string. "Found this years ago," he said. "Couldn't bring myself to wear it. Maybe it's time it went to someone who still believes." Grace looked at it, then back at him. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, you'll take better care of it." When he walked out into the night, the moon caught the metal for a brief second, making it shine like hope reborn. Grace turned the cross over in her hand, feeling its cool weight. She slipped it around her neck beside her own. 2 crosses, 2 stories, 1 beginning. She whispered into the quiet diner. "Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on him, or on me." The air turned cooler as fall crept over the desert. Mornings came with thin mist, and nights carried the smell of mesquite smoke. Grace loved this time of year, when the land seemed to breathe easier, when even hard days felt gentler. But lately, she'd noticed something changing in Ryder. His eyes stayed alert, scanning the street when he thought no one was looking. His laughter came, less often. There was a tension in him now, a storm waiting behind calm skies. He stopped by the diner less, though Grace still saw him around town, helping fix an old vet's porch, loading food boxes for the church pantry, nodding politely when people spoke to him. He'd earned some trust, but not all. Some still crossed the street when he passed. Others watched from behind their curtains. One evening, just after closing, Grace locked the diner door and turned to find Ryder waiting by her truck. He was quiet, his face serious. "Can we talk?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Of course. You want to come inside?" He shook his head. "Better out here." They walked along the edge of the gravel lot. The sky was deep purple, the first stars flickering like faraway campfires. Ryder rubbed the back of his neck. "I had a visit today." "From who?" Grace asked. He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Old life, a man named Axel. He was my second in command before I walked away." Grace's heart sank. "He found you?" Ryder nodded slowly. "They don't let people go easy. He says the club thinks I talked to the feds years back. They're calling me a traitor." "Did you?" she asked carefully. He met her eyes. "No, not then. But I might now." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'm tired, Grace," he said, his voice rough. "Tired of watching people get hurt. Tired of pretending I can't change things. The cops have been looking for someone willing to testify about gun runs. I could give them everything. But if I do, Axel and the rest, they won't just come after me." He didn't have to finish. Grace understood. "They'll come after anyone close to you." He looked away. "You didn't sign up for that." Grace reached out, touching his arm. "Ryder, I didn't help you because it was safe. I helped you because it was right." He swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face. "You're braver than I am." "No," she said softly. "You're just scared of the wrong thing." He looked at her then, eyes glistening in the fading light. "What's the right thing to be scared of?" "Losing the person you're becoming," she whispered. "Because that man, the one who fixed my truck, who repaired the church roof, that's who you really are." Ryder closed his eyes and nodded, as if memorizing her words. 2 nights later, the diner was quiet when a crash shattered the peace. Grace jumped, nearly dropping a tray of dishes. Glass exploded across the floor as a brick slammed through the front window. She screamed and ducked, heart hammering. When she looked up, she saw red paint sprayed across the wall, letters dripping and jagged. "Rat Ryder." Her hands shook as she backed away. Outside, tires screeched. By the time Sheriff Weller arrived, the vandals were long gone. "Looks like a warning," the sheriff muttered, flashlight sweeping over the mess. "You've been getting visits from that biker. Again?" Grace swallowed. "He's a friend." Weller sighed. "You got to understand, Grace, men like that, no matter how much they change, their past doesn't forget them." She bristled. "And what about Grace, Sheriff? Doesn't the past deserve forgiveness too?" He met her gaze evenly. "Forgiveness, sure, but it don't erase consequences." When he left, Grace stood amid the broken glass, too tired to cry. She swept the floor slowly, each scrape of the broom loud in the silence. By the time she finished, the sun was just beginning to rise, turning the shards into glittering flecks of light. She whispered, "They can break windows. They can't break faith." That afternoon, Ryder showed up, blood at the corner of his lip, jacket torn. Grace ran to him. "What happened?" "They found me," he said, voice low. "Axel's boys. Said next time it'll be worse." "Ryder," she said, panic rising. "You can't keep this up." "I won't," he said. "I'm done running. But I had to make sure you were safe first." She led him inside, cleaning the cut on his lip with trembling hands. "You can't face them alone." "I have to," he said quietly. "This isn't your fight." "It is now," she said fiercely. "They hurt my diner. That makes it personal." He gave a soft, pained laugh. "You're something else, Grace Miller." "I've been called worse," she said, smiling despite herself. For a long moment they stood close, the air between them charged with everything they didn't say. Then Ryder stepped back. "I'll make it right," he said. "You have my word." She shook her head. "No, Ryder. Promise me something else." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't lose yourself trying." He looked at her, eyes dark and full of emotion. "I can't promise that," he said quietly. "But I can promise I'll try." That night, the diner stayed dark. Grace sat alone in her trailer, clutching the silver cross he'd given her. Outside, thunder rolled low across the desert. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. A reckoning, maybe. At midnight, headlights swept across her window. She stood, heart in her throat, but it wasn't Ryder. A single envelope slid under the door. She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a photo, her diner, taken that morning, and a note scrawled in red ink. "Stay out of club business." Grace's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, the letter trembling in her hands. Fear pressed in around her, thick as smoke. But beneath it, something steadier stirred, a quiet defiance. She set the note aside and whispered, "You won't scare me away. Not from helping him." Then she did what she'd always done when the world turned dark. She prayed. "Lord, keep him safe. Keep me brave." The wind outside rose and fell like a sigh. Somewhere far away, a motorcycle started, the sound fading into the night. And Grace Miller, shaking but unbroken, whispered one more time into the dark, "Don't let the ghosts win." Days passed with no sign of Ryder. At first, Grace tried to keep busy. She fixed the broken window, repainted the diner walls, and opened each morning like nothing had happened. But as the seats sat empty, and the quiet stretched longer than the hum of the fridge, she felt the ache of worry settle into her bones. Every time the bell above the door jingled, her heart leapt. But it was never him, just customers asking for refills or the sheriff dropping by to check in. By the third day, she caught herself looking down every road she drove, scanning the horizon for the shape of his bike. On the fifth day, Sheriff Weller came into the diner, hat in hand. "Morning, Grace," he said, his tone careful, her hand stilled on the counter. "You've heard something?" He nodded. "Word is Ryder Kane's gone to ground. Folks say he's gearing up to talk to the feds." Grace's stomach dropped. "Then he's in danger." "That's likely," the sheriff admitted. "You might want to stay somewhere else for a while, just till things settle." "I'm not leaving," Grace said firmly. "This is my home." He studied her face, saw the steel there, and gave a slow nod. "Then keep your doors locked. And if he contacts you, tell me." Grace said nothing. When he left, she sank into the nearest booth and pressed her hands together. The fear felt heavy, but beneath it was something deeper. Faith. She whispered into the empty diner, "Lord, if he's doing what's right, protect him. Don't let evil take him back." A week passed. The days blurred together. Morning sun, coffee steam, the slow rhythm of waiting. Then, one afternoon, an envelope appeared in the mail slot. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words written in Ryder's rough, blocky handwriting. "You saved me once. Now I have to finish this." Below the note was his dog tag. the metal dull from years of wear. Grace sat at her kitchen table, the tag warm from her fingers, tears welling up until she couldn't see. She closed her eyes and prayed through them. Lord, please, wherever he is, be his light. That night she dreamed of him walking through a desert storm, wind whipping around him, eyes fixed on a distant cross shining faintly through the dark. Weeks turned into months. Life crept on. The diner slowly filled again. Truckers, veterans, families on their way to Phoenix, but for Grace, the noise felt far away. People spoke less about Ryder now. The vandalism stopped. Even Pastor Brooks softened toward her again, but the empty space he left stayed like an open wound she couldn't heal. One evening, Linda came by after church. She sat across from Grace at the counter, sipping coffee. "You still waiting?" she asked gently. Grace nodded. "He said he'd finish it. I have to believe that means he'll come back." Linda reached across and squeezed her hand. "You've got a heart made of hope, Grace Miller. I just pray it doesn't break you." Grace smiled faintly. "Hope doesn't break. It bends." Linda nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "Then may it bend you toward peace." They sat quietly for a while, two women bound by the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. Late one night, the sound of engines shattered the silence. Grace jolted upright in bed, heart racing. Red light flashed against her window, then faded. She ran to the curtain and peeked outside. Two motorcycles tore down the main road, their noise fading into the distance. Her knees gave out with relief. For a moment, she thought it might have been Ryder. But she knew that sound wasn't his. It didn't have the same steady rhythm she'd memorized. She sank to the floor and whispered, "Please, God, let him be alive." The next morning brought news. The radio crackled as Grace poured coffee for the few early customers. A local announcer's voice filled the diner. In other news, multiple members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club were arrested in Phoenix early this morning in connection with illegal weapons trafficking. Sources say a key witness provided evidence leading to the arrests. Grace froze. The cup in her hand trembled, spilling coffee across the counter. Linda, who had come in for breakfast, looked up sharply. "Grace." Grace's lips parted, her heart pounding. "He did it," she whispered. "He turned them in." Linda stood, eyes wide. "Then he might be—" "I know," Grace said, voice breaking. "But he did the right thing." She wiped her eyes, then straightened. "And that means he's still the man I believed he could be." That night, the diner closed early. Grace sat alone in the corner booth, Ryder's dog tag in her hand. She thought of the man she'd met on a dusty roadside, of the broken soul who'd learned how to believe again. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain. She whispered to the empty room, "You found your way, didn't you?" And though there was no answer, she felt something warm move through the air, a quiet peace that told her she was right. The morning news crackled over the diner's old radio while Grace wiped the counter. She wasn't paying much attention until she heard the name. Former Hells Angels leader Ryder Kane testified today, helping federal agents bring down a major weapons ring. Her hand froze mid-swipe. The rag slipped from her fingers. The announcer went on about charges, cooperation, and a court hearing in Phoenix that afternoon. Grace's knees nearly buckled. He was alive, and he'd done it. Linda looked up from her coffee. "Grace, you okay?" Grace's throat tightened. "He did what he said he would. He told the truth." Linda took her hand. "Then go. He shouldn't face that alone." By noon, Grace was on the highway, her truck rattling through desert wind. Every mile carried a prayer. "Please, Lord, let him stand strong. Let me see him once more." When she reached the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Grace slipped inside quietly and took a seat in the back. And then, there he was. Ryder stood before the judge, thinner but proud, his blue eyes steady. When his gaze found hers, the smallest smile crossed his face. The judge spoke firmly. "Mr. Kane, you helped stop great harm. This court recognizes your courage. Sentence, time served." Applause broke out before the bailiff hushed the room. Grace pressed a hand to her heart, tears blurring her sight. As guards led him past, Ryder stopped beside her row. "You came," he whispered. She nodded. "You did the right thing." He smiled faintly. "Because you showed me how." Then he was gone through the heavy door. Grace stepped outside into sunlight, the courthouse glowing gold in the fading day. The desert wind brushed her face, warm and full of promise. She whispered to the sky, "Thank you, Lord." For the first time in years, she felt peace, a peace shaped like forgiveness and born from courage. When Grace returned home, the diner felt different, quieter but peaceful. The broken window had been replaced, the walls freshly painted, and the gossip had faded to silence. People came in with smiles instead of whispers now. Some even asked about Ryder, their voices softer, kinder. She worked with a new rhythm, lighter on her feet, her heart no longer heavy. The sheriff stopped by one morning, hat in hand. "He did good, Grace," he said. "Man like that doesn't change often. You helped him find his way." Grace smiled. "He found it himself. I just pointed him toward the light." Later, Pastor Brooks visited to thank her for inspiring the town. "You reminded us that grace isn't just a word," he said. "It's a choice." The next Sunday, the church pews were full again. The repaired roof gleamed in the sunlight as the congregation sang louder than ever. Grace sat in the front row, eyes closed, the silver cross warm against her heart. That afternoon, she reopened the diner with a new sign above the door. Grace and Grit Cafe. Linda helped hang it, laughing through tears. "It fits you," she said. Grace looked around at the clean floors, the humming kitchen, the soft music playing from the jukebox. "It fits all of us," she replied. As dusk settled, she stood at the window watching the desert glow. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right again. It was a crisp autumn morning when the bell over the diner door jingled softly. Grace looked up from wiping the counter and froze. A tall man stood in the doorway, thinner than she remembered, his hair shorter, his beard trimmed. He wore no leather, no chains, just a plain flannel shirt and a shy smile. "Morning," he said. His voice was quieter, gentler. For a moment, Grace couldn't move. Then she whispered, "You came back." Ryder nodded. "Couldn't stay away. Owe someone a cup of coffee." The customers went silent, eyes wide, but Grace didn't care. She poured him a mug herself and set it before him. He wrapped his scarred hands around it and sighed. "Didn't think anyone would ever give me another chance," he said. Grace smiled softly. "You earned this one." He looked around the diner, noticing the new sign, Grace and Grit Cafe, and the laughter echoing through the room. "You made it better," he said. "We both did," she replied. As he finished his coffee, she asked, "So what now?" Ryder shrugged, eyes warm. "Don't know. But if you've got dishes that need washing, I'm your man." Grace laughed, tears blurring her vision. "There's always work for good hands." He joined her behind the counter, rolling up his sleeves. The sound of running water and quiet laughter filled the diner. For the first time in years, both of them belonged. Months passed, and the Grace and Grit Cafe became the heart of the small desert town. Where suspicion once lingered, warmth had taken root. Travelers stopped in for coffee and stayed to talk. Old neighbors who hadn't spoken in years shared pie and laughter at the same tables. Grace moved easily among them, her smile calm, her silver cross shining in the afternoon light. The past no longer hurt. It had turned into testimony. Ryder worked beside her most days, sleeves rolled, apron tied clumsily around his waist. He washed dishes, repaired chairs, and laughed with the veterans who helped out part-time. He never talked much about what came before, and Grace never asked. She could see peace settling in him day by day, as steady as sunrise. Every Sunday, Ryder sat quietly in the back pew of the church. The same people who once judged him now nodded with respect. Pastor Brooks would smile knowingly from the pulpit, his words softer than before. One golden evening, Ryder helped an elderly traveler whose pickup had stalled near the cafe. Grace watched from the doorway, her heart swelling as the two men laughed when the engine finally roared to life. The moment mirrored their beginning, a simple act of kindness changing everything. As twilight spread across the desert, Grace whispered, "It all started with a broken engine and a little bit of grace." Beside her, Ryder smiled. "Guess that's how miracles begin." And in that quiet, the world felt healed. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.